Welcome to a new St. Olga interview. We're back with one of my favorites, John Whitberg. And the topic is Montauk, as promised, famous for tinkering with the timeline and playing around with the laws of physics. I'm planning to get into the nitty-gritty, not just the manicured side that was presented in the literature. Instead, focus on eyewitness testimonies and give the perspective of the lost boys, so to speak. And John Whitberg has served no less than 2 altars there. And if I understand correctly, it started as early as the 1950s when your embryo was inserted into a surrogate mother.
Yes. She was a CIA operative. I think she signed up for this, but I'm sure she had been mind fractured as a child too. So, I can't really blame her for anything either. But she lived with her husband on a naval base in Okinawa, Japan, which was really more of a forward operating base for CIA ops in Southeast Asia.
So we're talking about Alexander Bronsley, who you consider your true original identity. Is that true?
Yes, that's at least my working theory right now.
What else can you say to add some insight about, was he created in a lab specifically to be used in all these programs?
I believe so, yes.
And how did you actually get to this realization?
Just through memories, through working through the memories, and realizing the dates, and that because of some things told to me by 2 contacts of mine, who I will not name, but who confirmed this and nudged me in the right direction. I'm not saying they did not influence my testimony at all.
I see.
Yeah.
Would you be able to say who is whose altar? Are you an altar of him, or is he an altar of you?
My working theory at the moment is that I'm an altar of him.
What's your working theory on where and why was John Whitberg created?
That part I'm not entirely sure about yet. Just, I do think maybe some people in the project have, well, we've touched on this topic before, but that they have whistleblower altars who, maybe there is someone out there who wants this exposed, and so they pull some strings so that some of us have a whistleblower altar.
So someone is orchestrating the disclosure movement?
I think so.
But unknown who?
Yeah, unknown who.
What else can you tell us about what happened after you were inserted into a surrogate mother? I think you also mentioned that you have gone through a number of SRA sites, including Disneyland.
Yes, Disneyland. Another one in, I haven't been able to find where exactly, but it's in a small town in Michoacan State, Mexico, underneath a church in a small little town somewhere. But Disneyland really stands out in my mind.
What can you tell us about it?
Well, Alex's mother would take him by car from where they lived in this other CIA location, which was in Michoacan, in the capital city. They would drive up over the border into the States and then up over to Disneyland, which is not terribly far from the border. And there's a room underneath the Snow White ride, or there was in the late 50s, early 60s, where they would, try not to be too graphic, but the characters would sexually act upon children, in a large group. People wearing the costumes of the characters, I should say, not like cartoon characters, real people wearing costumes.
Like furries?
Yeah, well, that's a part of Disneyland, by the way, is people walking around dressed as characters from the Disney movies. So it's not out of place in that location.
I see. And by the way, the SRI stands for Satanic Ritual Abuse. And
Yes.
why did you get through so many of these facilities, whatever? Is it because you had to be mind fractured so many times, or your psychic abilities were such that it required such operations?
Bit of both, I believe.
So let's jump to Project Phoenix, which is the real name of Montauk 2.0, I should say, the famous period before it relocated. What would you describe it as, and how has it affected Earth?
I would describe it as the ultimate time travel program and the ultimate manipulation program of time and other things. Time, perspectives, the minds of the public. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
How would you say it has trickled down? I mean, what were its main effects?
It's had enormous main effects. It's responsible for a number of the Mandela effects that we know about. It's responsible for a number of historical outcomes, and it has made a huge contribution to our pop culture because of the music that was written there that are now popular songs, and because of a number of influential pieces of media that are self-disclosing the program.
We'll get to that in a while, but so it's fair to say that it started with Nazi scientists that were plucked into this Brookhaven National Laboratories who were studying mind control back in around World War II era. Is that fair to say so far?
Yes, that was the beginnings of it. Yes.
People know it for the Philadelphia experiment. They're playing with relocating physical objects. Then it got to studying time. And what was the main object of attention when you were in the projects?
The main object of attention was the chair, the Montauk chair, it's really just a hyperspace navigation chair like you would find on any Nachtwaffen ship that was recovered, or at least they told us it was recovered from the Roswell crash in 47. And to study it, it was brought to Camp Hero, which is not all that far from Brookhaven Labs. Both are on Long Island, and it was discovered when they went through this ship, through the documents on it, that you had to have either an alien to navigate it or a mind fractured child to operate the navigation chair. And at that time, they didn't really have any alien prisoners because America was falling pretty far behind in 1947 in terms of the SSP. So, of course, they turned to mind fractured children, and the project at Brookhaven and the study of the navigation chair at Camp Hero were just kind of merged in the early 50s.
I see. So let's go quickly over the aspect of the chair and its main function.
It opens portals through a fourth dimension to another location in 3D. It can go either in time or in space or both.
And what did it look like?
It looked like a dentist's chair, pretty much. A nice dentist chair. It had like leather. If you just sat in it, it was actually pretty comfortable, but to use it, of course, it was quite painful for most people. And it was upholstered originally in a light tan color, and then it got reupholstered a few times. But
Interesting. And what did the portal look like? Would it just be visible to you, and how would you access it?
it was visible in front to everyone. They had a big metal ring in the room that contained it, and it looked like a long tunnel with holes in the side, and you could just see the other point at the end of it where it was coming out to.
Right. And you said you could access 3D, but you could also tap into higher than that because you said that
Yeah.
you even had a certain contact with some ethereal beings.
Yes, you could. You could go to other dimensions. That wasn't often practiced, but it could be done.
Right. Okay, so how come you ended up there, and did it have anything to do with your parents selling you to it?
Yes, they sold me to it. Like I said, she was CIA. The father was naval intelligence. They were both well connected within the projects, and they had signed up to have this surrogate child to eventually turn over. So it wasn't the usual story of people being kidnapped for this program as such. Like, he was destined for it from the moment that the embryo was made.
Interesting. Um, when you look back at all these memories, do you perceive them as being you or a different person?
A different person, pretty much. Because Alex, there have been a few times in his life where he has been in some situations that were very similar to ones I've been in, and he reacted quite differently. So to me, that speaks volumes and tells me that he's not the same person as me.
But you share a lot of stuff as well.
Yes, we do. We do.
Do you figure that you're a clone right now?
I I imagine. I think so. Yes.
So, going back to Montauk, you were foisted into this black van and driven there and hosed off and shaved. And can you pick it up from here?
Yeah. After the hosing off and shaving, and I might add, it was an extremely long drive, because it was from Lukeville, Arizona, which is a little border town, all the way up to Long Island. It took, conservative estimate, I'd say 36 hours. And no food was issued, no water was issued, and they stopped for the bathroom maybe every 6 or 7 hours. It was an excruciating trip. And I was not the only kid in the van, by the way, there were others. But at any rate, after arriving, you were marshaled along, you were unloaded from the van, marshaled into the radar tower, down into the basement of it, where you were hosed off and shaved and given a set of striped flannel pajamas, which were adult sized, by the way. So they swallowed you up and the pants were constantly falling off, and it was pretty humiliating, really. And you got marshaled down a long corridor into the room where the cages were. Although at that time they did not have dog cages, it was just a big long chicken wire fence that separated half the room from the other half, and you were put inside this chicken wire fence and just left there pretty much.
Ouch. What was your first proper like interaction there?
First proper interaction was with another kid, actually. I will add that at that time they were bringing in kids from all over the Western Bloc. Not just America, Canada, Spain, Italy, South Africa, Japan, Germany, everywhere.
But
And
within
so,
a certain age range.
yes, all between the ages of 6 and 10 that I can remember. Oh no, there were a couple who were younger, but most of them between the ages of 6 and 10. So there was a total breakdown of communication because most of these kids could not understand each other's languages at all. Um, my first proper interaction was finding another American kid and talking, and he had been there for several days, and he told me what to expect, that they're going to examine you for abilities, doing this, this, and this, and then they're going to put you in the chair, and you'll probably never be seen again after that, after they put you in the chair, because you probably will die, and then they'll get rid of your body, and you'll just never be seen again. So that was that.
I believe he also told you that the only way out is through the chimney.
No, that was someone else. That was when we first got into the cage room. There was just the kid who let us in there. He was older than us. He was a teenager, and he just said, welcome to Camp Hero, ladies and gents. I hope it's to your liking, because your only way out is through the chimney.
Meaning through being burnt alive because you're of no use to them anymore.
Yeah.
So was this humiliation done in order for you to create more altars, or was it just for them to, get their jollies off?
It was through both of those things, and also it served a bit of a purpose, because it was also trying to create that kind of, I guess, law of the jungle mindset, that you're only out to survive and for yourself, and that you had better follow our orders if you want to stay alive and all of that.
Right, right. And what was your first, let's say, task or assignment?
First proper assignment after the testing phase was...
Well, let's go over the testing phase.
Okay.
What was that like?
The testing phase, they just tested out abilities. Alex was not ever put through the chair, because unlike most of these kids who had been grabbed more or less at random, Alex, they knew what his abilities were and that he would not be able to use the chair. So he was never put through that. They had him testing out first remote viewing, trying to remote view things, both on and off planet. Then they had him doing the crush the can thing with telekinesis. And they also tested out what do you call it? The Zener cards, where the person is holding the card facing towards them, and the psychic has to say what's on the card.
Regarding the remote viewing, did you get the target beforehand, or was it in an envelope or something?
It was just a string of numbers.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess I'm pretty sure they were coordinates.
No, I'm pretty sure it was encoded double-blind protocol.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's the orthodox methodology.
Okay.
So, could you describe like a day in the life there?
Day in the life was after you had been tested and everything. It was brutal. You were kept in the cage area, and you would be in there sometimes for days on end. Sometimes people just starved to death right there, because they would only intermittently issue food. And when you were that isolated in that cage room, there was no access to the black market, which we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But while you were in there, it was near the room where the chair was, and they made a point of wheeling by on a wheelbarrow the kids who had died in the chair, so you would see them. And
where were they wheelbarrowing them to?
The crematoria, which was, I have to think, it was just, you would go out a hallway and then down an elevator a ways to below most of the rest of the compound, and it was underneath a certain building, and when you came up to the surface, you would nearly always see smoke coming out of that chimney, because so many people just died. And so a day in the life there after the testing was, you would be in the cage, then eventually someone would come and get you, and you would be taken to this work detail or that work detail, and sometimes you got a permanent assignment there, permanent-ish. You would still be called away to other work details on occasion. When you were in a work detail, things were better, as a general rule.
And your first proper task was also remote viewing related. And how did they test your success rate? Did you get instant feedback from them?
Not instant feedback, no. You just kind of knew if you had been successful or not, because if you weren't successful, then you were flogged, publicly flogged for it. So you just kind of knew if you had been successful, because that didn't happen.
Right. And were there courses beforehand for all these different psionic abilities?
Not in that era, no.
Okay. Let's quickly gloss over some of the famous personalities and your encounters with them. Could you describe your relationship with, let's say, Al Bielek?
Al Bielek was terrified of me. He was one of the panel who carried out the examinations in that era, or the testing, I should say, not examinations, because those have different connotations. But when I came into that room, he walked up to my handler and his handler both, pulled them aside, and he said, "Keep that kid the fuck away from me." And so he avoided me at all costs.
How come?
Because according to another whistleblower, I don't remember this myself, but according to another whistleblower, there was another timeline that he was aware of, that I guess he had visited or that he had heard about somehow and somehow recognized me from it, where I had become a fascist dictator, pretty
So I
much.
figured you still had that threat even in this timeline.
Yeah. I mean, that came from somewhere within my personality, so yeah.
Right. So limited interaction there. What about Duncan Cameron?
Duncan, he and I would occasionally coordinate things when someone had to run errands. He was pretty much an errand boy. He didn't have he had some abilities, and so he would do jobs too, but his main function was as an errand boy.
So his involvement is kind of blown out of proportion by comparison with this main cast, let's say.
Yeah,
I see.
definitely.
And maybe just one or two details about a certain Dr. Maria.
Dr. Maria was the main programmer there. A lot of people remember her when I've shown people her picture, but she was, she was the lead programmer, uh, mind fracturer, and all that entails.
Okay, and finally, maybe the most recognized, which is also the one who has authored the most books related to the subject, Preston Nichols. What was your relationship like with him?
He took a shine to me, which is disturbing to say, but he did. He was a very disturbed individual. Like, he was a very, very disturbed individual. He would, he liked me because I was good at my jobs, and he liked that I put up a fight. Use your imagination as to what I mean by that.
You didn't have slave mentality, and that gave
No.
him, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't, and he liked that. He liked people who had a strong personality, and so he took a shine to me. So I had a tiny bit of an advantage because of that. By the way, at that time in 1963, up until 1971, he was not the head of the project. He was involved and he was high up, but he was not the head until 1973 or 71. Sorry.
Who was the head up to that point?
I just know that he was an Air Force general. I don't know his name.
That's good enough. So the consensus regarding Preston and Al is that they are lauded as illustrious whistleblowers who have risked their lives to come up with this insight. But you would argue that much of their crimes were not a result of mind control, but also their own personality came through.
Yes, I would argue that definitely. They weren't, no one was holding a gun to their heads, and you could see on their faces that they were really getting off on it. So,
Right. But the fact that he took a shine to you did come with its advantages, did it not?
yes, it did. I had more access to food because it would mean I was in the offices, and of course, in offices, with adults, people got lunch like normal people. So I had access to that, and he would sometimes send me out to get his special meals, and I would find ways to either buy some for myself or steal some while I was there because it wasn't really supervised very much.
What do you
So,
mean you had to bring in food from other places?
yes.
So you would just use the chair for recreation or just indulging?
Yeah, the privileged people there did that all the time to an absolutely insane degree. They would indulge in all sorts of things.
Such as?
People would go on dates. people would go to
in
places.
famous places.
Yeah, in famous places or on other planets or wherever. They would,
Breakaway planets?
yeah, or sometimes not even breakaway planets, sometimes just like primitive wilderness planets that they had found somehow. Like, don't know how they found these places, but they did. And people would go off to meet their favorite figures in history and all sorts of things like that. And then when they did that, they would, if they hadn't hidden themselves well enough in that time period, they would bring this historical figure back and mind wipe them and then send them back.
So
And
they were brought to Montauk underground,
yeah, yeah, they were brought through the portals.
but not let out, just played around there, and that's it.
Yeah,
And did you manage to catch some glimpses of famous figures?
I did a few, yes. I caught a glimpse of Chiang Kai shek. I caught a glimpse of who I'm pretty sure was Henry VIII, assuming the portraits are accurate. And I caught glimpses of people who were visibly royalty of some sort. I couldn't really identify them from various countries.
How did they react to being taken there?
Shock, most of them. A couple of them who were from more recent times, such as Chiang Kai shek, didn't show any surprise at all. They were clearly aware of phenomena like this.
And you mentioned they were mind wiped. Does that mean that you were not?
No, I was not, no.
Never.
Maybe after a few missions from time to time, but not as a general rule.
Cool. So, in addition to the mind fracture, in order to enhance psychic abilities, they also do it to garner income in the form of selling the altars in the slave market. Is that correct?
Yes, there were people who would come into Camp Hero, and they would walk around and comb the compound for kids with certain abilities, or who had altars that had certain abilities that could suit their purposes. And then Project Phoenix would either sell them the altar, or they would sometimes wholesale rent out a kid for a set period of time.
And I believe that Adam, who we dedicated a couple of videos to, was also created there, and it was an accident of sorts.
Yes, it was. It was just I don't remember yet exactly what it was that caused him to be created, but he was. And when he started coming out while he was interacting with people, because these people are trained to notice when someone shifts altars, they knew immediately. He was then tested, and it was discovered his only real ability was telepathy. But eventually, some Solar Warden people came in, again combing the compound, looking for people who were telepaths, and his name came up on the list, so he was sold to Solar Warden.
And so it had heavy ties with the Illuminati. There were some of the guys who bought some of these altars, as well as royalties and politicians. Were they there roaming around at times?
Yes, they were.
So it was connected also through the underground tunnels.
Yes, definitely.
And to the people in the know, this is just just another day. I mean, nothing out of the ordinary. There are even other Montauk-like programs.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just this one is more famous somehow. So, how many kids would you estimate have been abducted in this way in order to, be enslaved, basically?
Into Project Phoenix, the number I know is approximately 2 million and counting.
Right. And what were their criteria for picking them?
Bloodlines, and pretty much just bloodlines. Looking for, the classic things.
Right, but I believe that after they ran out of bloodline children, they had to opt for indigent kids and also not just focus on the present, but also go back in time and forward and pick up from the future and the past.
Yes, they did. They did do that, and they are doing that still.
Whoa, okay. So did they do that in order to get away unnoticed, also because there are certain entities that are governing the timelines?
I don't doubt it, and also because they would be unnoticed by the authorities, pretty much. Because, like, if there's a sudden giant chunk of kids that go missing within a certain time period, then people are going to investigate that. So they were spreading out their efforts so as to not be noticed. That was also a part of it.
I see. Seeing as they were also going to the future, is it fair to say that there are children who are maybe not even born yet, who are going to face the inevitability of being enlisted into Montauk?
Unfortunately, yes.
I see. And about how many of the 2 million have died as a result?
Approximately 300,000.
So not that many then.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an absolutely tremendous number, but proportionally, I guess not that many. It's
Did they improve the death rate with time? Was it more drastic in the beginning?
definitely much more so, yes.
Yeah, just kind of a sideways question. Have you managed to prove the reality of this to yourself in certain ways?
I have, yeah, I have. The biggest thing is corroboration, and there is plenty of corroboration that I've been able to get. And also, there were Mandela effects that I remembered creating, and then when I looked them up, it turned out they were indeed known Mandela effects.
So you were tasked with creating Mandela effects on purpose as a prank?
No, not on purpose, no, but like when you came back from an op, there would be someone who would go back again and look for anything that had changed unintentionally, and then they would report back. And so, of course, Mandela effects were a part of that. And it wasn't intentional most of the time, but it was kind of an inevitability.
Didn't they use this feedback of stuff having changed as a way to revert the mission, maybe, as a sign that they went too far?
Yes, they did. That happened, yes.
So when did they draw the line?
When someone that they wanted alive had died, or might turn out had never gotten to be born, or when they had accidentally changed a political regime that they liked, or things like that.
So the Mandela effects are the stuff that they didn't consider that important and they just left as they were.
Yeah.
I see. And about your treatment there, which was, I think you described as concentration camp, were you also given Stockholm syndrome and fed lies about the fact that you were these heroes that were contributing to the salvation of humanity?
Yeah, you were. And I never really fell for it. I went along with it, and there were parts of me that believed that we were making a better world, but I never bought into the idea that all of this trauma and death was worth it.
Right on. Yeah. But speaking of trauma, there was also such a thing called trauma twinning, which had a dual purpose. Could you briefly cover that?
Yeah, it was part of the purpose was to pair you with someone who had complementary abilities. So creating a perfect little pair to send out on ops. And the other part was to create an attachment to this project, so that you would not rebel, because if you rebelled, you would be forced to watch your trauma twin be tortured, or worse. And most people can't bear that.
Even worse than yourself being threatened.
Yeah.
They use this as a consequence for insubordination.
Oh, yeah.
And the other purpose was to multiply the assets,
Yes.
breeding.
Yes.
And how successful were they?
Very successful. Very successful. They would have them breed, and the woman would become pregnant, and before the start of the second trimester, they would extract the baby
How come?
and put, because they wanted to do genetic alterations to it and things like that, which in that time period it was easier to do, um, and it is easier to do if the baby isn't in the womb. And so they would do that, and then they would send the baby in an artificial womb to other projects or off planet, and eventually they would be funneled back into Montauk a lot of the time.
And lastly, about the trauma twinning, was it always artificial, or were they also actually looking for genuine soul mates and then paired them together to make an even stronger bond?
Yeah, I'm sure they were looking for that. Personally, I don't really believe in soulmates, but I think that there are things that kind of approach that, and they would look for that.
So maybe the only thing that you could actually do to resist them is to kill yourself. Did they ever yield anything?
No, they didn't really want you. They didn't really allow you to kill yourself. I mean, you could kill yourself, but then you'd be put in a regen tank. Um, the only way you got to die permanently and escape was if you had died failing them in some way, failing to use the chair, failing on a mission, whatever. If you died that way, then you got to die permanently, but otherwise, no.
So in a way that they wouldn't be able to recover you. Or,
Yeah, or that they thought you would no longer be useful if they did.
right. So there's a lot of lore about celebrities having been part of the project. At the same time, none of them were in authoritative positions. They were all victims, right?
Yeah, the ones that I saw, yes.
And like the other children, they were also used as assets for time traveling purposes and sent on missions.
Yes, they were.
And let's just name a couple of them. I think Mark Hamill was cited as having been seen there.
Yes, he was. I mean, if you look at him, he's a pretty visible hybrid. And there were a number of people from old Hollywood, particularly, who showed up there. Um, some of them were there for many decades.
Give us a couple names.
Uh, Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, uh, Janis Joplin, David Bowie.
So they were sex slaves there, or what?
Uh, Not all of them, no. Marilyn Monroe, yes, she was a sex slave. Janis Joplin, Cary Grant, and David Bowie, they all ran missions. They were all on missions, I should say. They didn't run them.
And likely mind fractured themselves, right?
I have no doubt.
Right, right. So what is the connection between the music industry and Montauk? Is it fair to say that it has affected it?
Massively so. A lot of popular songs, a lot of popular songs were written at Montauk.
By ghostwriters.
Effectively, yes. I don't like that term because ghostwriters know that they won't get credit for it. These people were just writing songs and then having them stolen and sold to the music industry.
Oh, so they weren't forced to do it?
Sometimes yes, I'm sure, but they were, a lot of times it was just implicitly encouraged, and songwriting does kind of distract you from all the stuff going on around you. So it was a common thing people did to distract themselves. And
But there would have to be massive amounts of these, not ghostwriting, but indirect creditless writing.
yeah,
And could you give us some examples of the bands or what have you?
I know a lot of songs that were supposedly written by Electric Light Orchestra, or that were played by Electric Light Orchestra, were written there by a woman who, I'll use her alter's name, Anastasia Trent. She wrote a lot of those songs and several others. She wrote, that song, Mr. Sandman, Bring Me Your Dreams. That
Yeah,
song, I know
yeah,
she
yeah.
wrote that because her trauma twin had the call sign Sandman. So that's about him. And let's see, a number of songs that were played by the band Lifehouse in the late 90s, early 2000s were written there originally.
Beatles, maybe, because a lot
Yeah,
of them are mysterious as to how they came about.
I'm sure some of the Beatles, yes. And a lot of the ones I found, they changed the language. A lot of them were translated into Chinese and became pop music in China or
Hmm.
within China's sphere of influence to hide them. Because, I mean, how many white Americans do you know who listen to Chinese pop music? So it would make it unlikely that they would be found.
But surely Montauk wouldn't just insert these songs just for the sake of it, but for more devious reasons, such as encoding messages, like Preston mentioned in one of his books, that the music doesn't just carry the sound itself, but also more subtle electromagnetic, what you could call thought messages, which can be, for example, you are to listen to the song again and buy the album. Do you know anything
Yeah,
about that?
I know that they did that because music is quite a powerful thing. It carries vibrations through it. It does all sorts of things like that. So they would do that partly to insert these things through subliminal messaging, or even sometimes, if you look at the lyrics of songs pretty explicitly, so that people would be kind of singing along to them and just implicitly kind of consenting to it.
Right, but what was their overarching agenda?
Uh, Mind control of society,
Right,
basically.
right. And not just this society, but also breakaway planets, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
Hmm. So would you say that in your overall SSP experience, humans are more gifted than, let's say, ETs at music making?
As a general rule, yes. I mean, I'm sure they would say the same thing about themselves, but you know, but from the standpoint of music that I can stand to listen to, yes, I think we're a lot better at it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So anything else about the music?
Oh, I wanted to talk about an Electric Light Orchestra song, actually,
Sure.
called Wild West Hero. That was written by myself and or by my
Alex.
all yeah, by Alex and two other people who I won't name in an off-planet operation on Bellatrix Secunda, what our military calls that planet. It was all the way back in time to during the Orion Wars, and they were holed up in a little mountain village there, pretty much stranded for several weeks. And while they were there, they wrote an album, and they called it Sunsets on Tiamat. And the only song from that that I've been able to find so far was Wild West Hero by Electric Light Orchestra, which that song that still makes me really emotional hearing that because it has a lot more meaning than people would probably give it credit for if they didn't know. It's about a longing to escape from the trauma of life at Project Phoenix.
Mm.
The other one I wanted to touch on was Danny Boy. There was a person very frequently cited in Montauk testimonies named Danny, and there was a woman there who was, I don't think she was his trauma twin. She and him were involved, and he had to go on an operation to Ireland, and she wrote Danny Boy. And there's an oft omitted third verse of Danny Boy. You can hear it in Sinead O'Connor's cover of the song. That if I should live and you should die for Ireland, let your dying thoughts be not just thoughts of me, but say a prayer to God for our dear island, as I know he'll hear and help to set her free. That says, our dear island, that means Long Island, and it's a prayer basically to be set free from the horrors of Project Phoenix.
Pretty deep.
Yeah.
So, as far as the overall agenda of this program, it came mostly from a certain sub-level, level 11, of the facilities which housed AI from a different planet. True?
I can't honestly say if it was from a different planet or not, but yes, it was an ancient AI that had been laying dormant underground there for maybe millions of years. We don't know, but it was found during World War II when the then new United States Air Force built Montauk Air Force Station, or Camp Hero, and they bored underground to build bunkers, and they came across this AI.
How does one interface with it?
You just enter a room and talk to it telepathically. It doesn't really require anything beyond that, just basic telepathy skills. It takes the corporeal form of a black cube, which is, if people have studied much, that has some very interesting connotations.
With black goo and so on.
Yes, and with the Saturn cube that people talk about at times. And there's also the giant black cube of Mecca and so on. It doesn't need that form at all. It does not require a corporeal form. It is that advanced.
So that was just for the sake of the questioner.
Yeah. It feels very, very weird when you're talking to someone and you can't see them or anything at all. So it would, I guess, out of common courtesy, insert itself into that cube when people were down there talking to it.
Right. And it was actually quite a secret, even among the personnel, that it was all driven by this AI, right? And how did you come to find out?
By being a pretty gifted telepath, it was decided, okay, you get to go down there and be one of the people who talks to it.
What did it
And
sound like?
it was just a very deep, very ethereal sounding voice in your head. Yeah.
And how did it speak?
It spoke in words, just in English.
Just sequential words, no images or something.
No, just in words.
Okay. And was it neutral or was it threatening or?
It was cordial, but I don't think it had good intentions. But I mean, when you were talking to it, it was cordial enough.
And as for the other sub-levels, you also mentioned that there were chimera and taxidermy museum and mythical creatures, cryptids.
Yes, there was. There were chimeras made in the labs from people's clones or alters. They would make human animal or human alien chimera creatures, sometimes so that they could send them on missions where a human-looking person could not blend in, and sometimes just for the hell of it, because it seemed like a cool science experiment, I guess. And there was also a taxidermy museum where they had cryptids, yes, that they had found either on other planets or back in time and killed and stuffed.
Wow. Could you confirm any of the recognized ones?
I saw there were a couple of griffins in there. There was a phoenix. There was a small dragon of some kind. I think it was an aquatic dragon of some sort. And there were let's see. There was something there that it kind of looked like a Sasquatch. I'm not sure if it was a Sasquatch and not just a weird ape that they'd found somewhere. But yeah.
Cool. So let's segue into the fact that Stranger Things is more or less a documentary. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Just how much of it would you say is on point?
The premise is entirely on point. And the characters, okay, for people who don't know, it's about a girl who escapes from a Montauk-like place and finds herself with a group of kids in a small town. She escapes, by the way, by doing basically the Junior thing, by pulling in a monster from another dimension and unleashing it within the facility and using the chaos as a cover to escape. And then there's also that another group of kids who find her and who kind of take her under their wing and use her to help them find a boy from their friend group who has disappeared into this other dimension. I believe that these things all pretty much happened, but I don't think that the characters are based on the people it happened to. I think that the characters are actually based on alters of people who were at Montauk. So they did a bit of a switcheroo on that aspect. But yeah.
The people who were the real inspiration, are they members of some of them members of the disclosure community?
Not that I can find, no, not yet.
Wait, okay, aren't you also part of the cast, you said?
Yes, I'm part of the cast of characters. I'm not one of the people this actually happened to. My alter was the inspiration for one of the characters, I believe.
Oh, so they just took the personalities of the disclosure members and then inserted them into events that happened to different Montauk assets.
Yes.
And these personalities, could you rattle some names? And also, they were some of the main players in this whole drama, right?
Yeah, eventually they did come to be, yes. Let's see. Some of them are not public, so I won't name them. The character of Nancy, I believe, is based on an alter of an aunt of mine. I believe that the character Will in the show is based on Alex. Personality is very similar.
So you're dead certain that you were the inspiration?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. And
Okay.
we look alike too.
Kind of.
Yeah. Well, you didn't see me, but you haven't seen a picture of me when I was that age.
No, I just didn't want to insult you because I think you look a little better than so.
Thanks. And there were, let's see,
Joseph, right?
yeah, Joseph. I believe he was the inspiration for oh God, what's the character? Michael or Mike, I believe, as a kid. Yeah, those are the ones I feel comfortable saying.
Okay. You said that Junior was also hinted at in Stranger Things. Could you tell us whether he really did end that iteration of Project Phoenix, also known as Montauk Project, and give us some context there? Why was he conjured?
As a self-defense mechanism and basically as an act of rebellion to finally end it, which he did. He ended that phase at any rate. And to be clear, I was not there when it happened. I was in Tibet. So I got there a couple of days after it had ended. But what happened was this kid, and I'm in contact with this person, so I'm not going to say too much because it's not just my story to tell. But this person, from my understanding, used their abilities to call forth a creature from another dimension who was also, by some fluke or other, was also an alter of theirs. And this creature or entity came in and wreaked havoc and killed most of the programmers. The rest of them all fled because they did not stand a chance. And I'm not entirely sure what happened to the being that people have since named Junior.
But it's not like the literature claims that Duncan Cameron actually called him in.
No, he did not.
So you know that for a fact. Okay.
Yeah.
And he destroyed the equipment. And how much did he kill of the overseers?
About 80% of them, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And what did it lead to?
It led to a massive change in how things were done. They stopped the sexual abuse of children. They didn't stop entirely abusing them. They still were beating them, but they weren't doing that as badly either. They weren't flogging them, anymore. And they stopped doing mind fracturing. So it morphed into pretty much just like any other time travel project.
So it lost its perverse aspect.
Yeah.
But was it still orchestrated by the AI?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Which is further proof that Alan and Preston were accountable for the wrongdoings of the past.
Yeah.
And I understand that there were also parties thrown as celebration.
Yeah, there were quite a few
Hmm.
parties thrown due to ousting these people.
And so that's around the time that it moved the headquarters.
No, headquarters didn't fully move until 2014, I'll get to that in a minute. But they did begin moving parts of the program to other facilities in Indiana, these are all at abandoned bases, by the way, that they've made a time bubble around and then revitalized inside the time bubble. Uh, the Indiana one was at a base called the Jefferson Proving Grounds. Uh, there was one in California at the Presidio in San Francisco, one in Washington at Fort Worden, and one in New Orleans that I cannot remember the name of that facility to save my life.
I think you mentioned in one of our previous ones.
Okay.
So what advantages did the being in a time bubble actually confer? And I guess it was technology that was, borrowed from the reptilians there or something.
It was borrowed from some ET group.
Hmm.
And what it did was it made it outside of time so that it could not really be found through normal means. You had to have portal
Coordinates.
coordinate. Yeah,
Hmm.
coordinates and a portal generator to get to those coordinates. And it also meant that they could take you outside of time into this time bubble, keep you there for thousands of years if they wanted to, literally, and then send you back, and no time would have passed.
Hmm.
So it,
It made it all possible, basically.
yeah, it made everything possible. Everything that they could ever really want out of a project like this became possible.
Hmm. And regarding these aliens, are they of reptilian nature, and are they draconian, or are they from elsewhere?
There were several different aliens there of varying species. There were some Dracos there who would eat the children. Eventually they showed up in around 67 or so. They stopped just incinerating these kids and started feeding them to these Draco. But I should make it clear they were not associated with the Empire, with the Draconian Empire. They were members of a terrorist group known as the Orion Syndicate. And yes, they did use that name in Star Trek. Um, you know, and there were others there. There were some ETs there who were slaves. Uh,
Grace?
yeah, there were several Greys there who were enslaved. There was one reptilian of an unknown species there, whom I've never talked about him in an interview before, but I believe I've mentioned him in our PMs. Ezekiel was his name. He was a black reptilian. Again, I don't know what species. Actually, he actually hated Draco, but I don't know what the name of his species was. But he was very good to us, actually. Um,
What
and
made
there was
him good? What was his job there?
intelligence,
Hmm.
intelligence gathering and dissemination. So he was basically a spy, and he was also a slave. But because of the contract he had been brought there under, he had a lot more privileges than we did, than most of the kids did. So he would leave food in places for us. Whenever we had to work on his work detail, he always treated us well. Um, Things like that.
Right.
So
Who was actually the first in command after the AI in terms of species?
after that, it was the Air Force commander or Air Force general, and then after that, it was a certain paperclip Nazi who took power in a silent coup. And then there in the 70s, there was another silent coup by Preston who took over. And then there was the junior incident, and uh, Joseph Salter Jimmy took over. So that
Right.
was the line of succession.
And it collaborated with other programs. It wasn't just independent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They collaborated with other programs. Well, like I mentioned, they were outsourcing or they were loaning out their people on pretty regular basis, for short periods of time. They would do that usually for money. Sometimes they would do a personnel exchange, things like that. So yeah, they collaborated with other programs.
Did you also meet with the long-necked greys that are known for really high intelligence?
Yeah, a couple of times. Yeah.
What were they like?
Robotic. Very robotic, I would say.
Okay. So this Ezekiel, was he the one that scanned your past lives?
No, that was one of the Orion Syndicate Dracos who did that.
And I believe there was another who was tasked with salvaging you if you went rogue in a mission.
I know some other people have mentioned that. I don't specifically remember it, but I certainly don't think that that's incorrect.
Mm-hmm. So let's say you went on a mission, you changed some key events, and what happened to the previous reality? I mean, where did it go?
It just ceased to exist.
Did it not go on a different branch or something?
Maybe it did, but I don't think so. I think it just ceased to exist.
And how successful were these missions in terms of, a percentage?
Success rate was high. I mean, it had to be, because if you weren't successful, you were killed. So people were successful most of the time.
Sometimes it took multiple tries.
Sometimes, yes.
And what were the main mission types and main goals?
Main mission types were in time, both on and off planet, and it was creating the timeline that the AI wanted, pretty much, and also in line with the goals of the Illuminati, who were also doing this, who were carrying this out, because they do own the military pretty much. And what was the second part of the question?
Oh, what was the purpose, the nature of the purpose of these missions?
The nature of them was manyfold. It was sometimes it would be simple assassinations, or just going back in time and grabbing a single artifact. Sometimes you would go back and you would stop an entire civilization from coming into existence. That happened.
Or just diminish one that was getting too powerful for its own good?
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They would do that. And a lot of the times it was also abducting people from history to pump them for intel.
Right. And another, let's say, objective was eliminating their competition from both the future and the past.
Yes, it was eliminating other time travel programs in other countries was a big thing that happened. And so they would go back in time and would sabotage whatever research and development or whatever anything had led to these projects being able to exist.
But what would give one an edge in that situation? Because they also had access, presumably, to the same level of machines. So how come Montauk got the edge over those?
I don't think that these people were as advanced, that these other projects were as advanced.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Montauk was considerably more so, and that did give them an advantage.
Right. So these missions could span a few hours to as much as a lifetime, just like
Yeah.
Looking Glass.
Yeah.
And once you were done with one life mission, you could be just sent on another straight afterward.
Yeah. There was a time period where they were doing multiple life missions a day, and people were just going insane and were being killed. And there was such a high turnover rate from that they had to slow that down.
They had to optimize. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was a way in which you could mess up a mission? Some of the ways.
Killing the wrong person, or not killing someone who you were supposed to, or by being seen by the wrong people and recorded as a time traveler, or by sometimes completely by accident, just by doing something that seemed innocuous, but that
would cue them that you are who you are.
yeah.
So you had to blend in. You were even given the garb of the time and the place.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And let's discuss some of the individual missions. I believe you were especially involved in archaeological findings.
Yes, in Egypt particularly, and also on Centurion, which we've talked about before.
Mhm.
Alex would be sent there. He had an ability where he could sense, I guess it was kind of retrocognition, where he could be transported to a set of ruins or something like that, or a burial ground, and he could see the past of it as he was walking through it, and so he would know where things were likely to be buried or to have fallen, and then they would dig based on that information. Um, and there were actually teams of kids who would do that. Um, yeah,
Collective remote viewing, or
kind of collective retrocognition.
okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking ancient technology because that's the most valued.
Yes. Because
Like stargates and computers, quantum computers.
Star, yeah, stargates, quantum computers, like really advanced holographic projectors,
Mm.
devices that could like remote influence people. Um,
Weapons.
yeah, well, yeah, weapons, and looking glass kind of similar things, not quite that advanced, but able to see in the past or future, or both.
And
Um,
scrolls, lots of scrolls.
yes, lots and lots of scrolls, lots of scrolls.
Right. Um, I believe that one of these missions involved Atlantis, where you were actually age advanced and you were forced to raid homes and museums.
Yes, age advanced and enhanced to be a super soldier, basically, and then sent in. It was around the time of the fall of Atlantis, going in and raiding people's homes and the museums and places where technology was found. And then, of course, Atlantis fell right after, and in the chaos, it wouldn't be noticed.
So they were tactical about this.
Yeah,
And which period of Egypt were you sent to?
I remember two different periods. One was in its very ancient past when the quote unquote gods were openly mingling among the people. They weren't gods, of course, they were ETs, but
They were
um,
perceived as gods even at the time?
not at the period where they were mingling, no. When they stopped mingling, then eventually a couple of generations later, people began perceiving them that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I remember being there also in the Victorian era in Egypt, uh, disguising ourselves as archaeologists. And, well, I mean, we were, but disguising ourselves as conventional
Mm-hmm.
archaeologists, I guess you could say, and going in and digging.
Just digging? You didn't? I thought you were going to say made to hide certain things or destroy.
Uh, a couple of times, yeah, but mostly digging and then handing it over to someone,
I see.
and they would take it back to Camp Hero or to another base for reverse engineering.
You didn't get face-to-face time with any of these Egyptian gods, or did you?
Saw them from a distance, but no, we weren't ever face to face with them.
Mm-hmm. So after the mission was over with, were you time traveled back to the point that you were sent, like
Oh,
with the SSP?
oh, yes, yes,
But
of
at
course.
the same time, you said that the Tibet mission deprived you of the junior,
Yeah,
revolt.
it was because while it was happening, they were late in coming to pick me up. They were delayed by a couple of days in coming to pick me up because of what was going
Right.
on. So that was how that happened.
Hmm. And also, you frequently got re-aged for these missions, especially the longer ones. And what's the span of years that you could expect to be re-aged at?
You were never allowed to age past around 45. I never heard of anyone being allowed to age past 45, and that was rare. Usually it was under 30 that you were kept.
But how young?
Oh, how young in between missions? I was a child. I was kept a child.
And how young could you go in a mission?
Uh, you could be as young as around 2 years old. That was not unheard of.
How would you know your tasks then? How would you know the
Oh,
list of...
because your mind is the same age as whatever age you were when they age regressed you. It's just the body is younger.
Yeah, but when you're inside a 2-year-old human, aren't you gonna have its limited thought processes?
No, no. Mind your mind will always be whatever age you're at.
Really?
Whatever your mentality does not regress with age. Just your body.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so let's go one by one on some of these missions. One of the most disturbing ones was when you were sent to Siena during the Renaissance period. It was a life mission in the early 70s. What do you recall from that?
Yeah, it was there was a certain inventor there who has been we successfully made him invisible to history. He developed certain flight technologies, and I think like very primitive radio of sorts in the Renaissance period, way before they were supposed to be out. Um,
Right.
and so what I had to do was go in his childhood, make myself basically his best friend, and through the decades, I would subtly sabotage his work and
Infiltrate, basically.
infiltrate and basically manipulate his life, always having to hide that I was doing this, of course, so that he never got noticed and things didn't work out for him.
So you had to speak Italian, and how were you able to do it?
You got language classes beforehand. Which
Classes. So
yeah,
not downloads.
what? No, not in that period. No.
Mhm.
Eventually, yes, they did have the technology to download a language, but in the early 70s, they did not have that yet. And
Were you alone?
I had a handler who was with me, who was she she was always kept around the same age. She was there as my mother for the first maybe 15, 20 years. And then when I had reached adulthood, she went back to Montauk. She got a new avatar body that looked different and came in, and we were married. And so from then on, my wife was my handler.
You probably didn't even know that it was her, right? When you married her.
Probably no.
Mhm. And I believe that it was very intricate and very delicate, the whole operation. You had to be very specific and to not attract attention, right?
Yeah. You had to accidentally, quote unquote, accidentally sabotage his paperwork and things that he was writing down at times. There were times you would meet up with a rival of his in secret and give them ways to sabotage this guy's work. Yeah, you had to be very subtle about it because remember, the operation was that I was his best friend and I had to keep that up. So,
And in this timeline, he was seen to be a bigger genius than probably even Leonardo da Vinci, right?
yeah, in the original, yeah, absolutely, he would have been.
And now he's a complete unknown.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
So I believe you were his next door neighbor? That was part of the game plan?
Yes, it was. How they had made these living arrangements ahead of time, I shall never know. But it had already all been set up. So that happened, and we would take pictures of a lot of his stuff with spy cameras. I had a spy camera hidden in a ring. That was one of the devices given to me for this op, and I would take pictures under the guise of being interested and looking through his papers, just like a normal person would. He would take the pictures or take the little roll of film out and leave it in a dead drop location. Someone from Montauk would portal in, pick them up, and then come back to the dead drop location with a new set of papers that were the same but just slightly different so that they were sabotaged.
Wow.
So that these things he was writing about could not work. When he would build something, sometimes we would stage a robbery. Actually, with the people we staged it with never knew who we were. We just, they were just the local criminal element in Siena.
And did you also actually break the devices?
A couple of times, yeah. Break them irreparably, knock them off a shelf or something onto the stone floor of this place, of this
How
house.
did it take to that?
He would get mad at me, but then he would be like, well, I'll eventually rebuild it, He really thought I was his good friend. And if there's some chance, some way that this guy is listening in, I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve this.
And just how far ahead of his time was he? What were some of the devices that he was building?
One of them was something like an airship. It was all mechanically operated and manual. There would be people turning wheels with gears, but it would still fly, or had it been completed. One of them was a telescope that was far ahead of its time. I remember he actually built that, and I remember using it, and you could see things on the surface of Mars with it.
Wow.
It was incredibly, incredibly ahead of its time. And
vehicles? Other vehicles?
Yeah, vehicles, yes. Something like a tricycle. He made something like a tricycle, and something like a very rudimentary car. Again, it was manually operated, but it was very much a car. It did not require a horse to pull it. So yeah.
And did he also make some early projectors?
Yes, an early projector using a gas light, of course, but yes, it was an early projector. And he did figure out some method of putting glass slides together, so you could play a sort of film. It would look very choppy, of course, but it was still quite ahead of its time.
So he eventually, he was considered a failure ultimately.
Ultimately, yes, and his research is unknown to history now.
So then you just were returned home as an old man and re-aged?
Yep. Or well, in my 40s was when, or ended his 40s is when he died, or maybe his early 50s, People didn't live that long back then.
That's true. So that was an example of a past mission. Let's maybe go into a distant future one, which possibly the furthest you've been sent, which is the 27th century. Do you recall having to infiltrate a space colonization company?
Yes, I did, on a Japanese one, owned by a man by the name of Tanaka. And this was basically just corporate espionage. It was, other than the setting it happened in, it was fairly standard corporate espionage stuff. Finding out what they were researching and developing, getting computer chips or hard drives and things like that from them and things like that. And I did that by inserting myself again into the family by courting and marrying his daughter, Michiko Tanaka.
So in this timeline, Earth had full disclosure.
Eventually, yeah.
And how did the technology look? I mean, we're talking 6 centuries from now.
It looked, very advanced. I guess nanopunk would be like a kind of aesthetic people could look up, like nanotechnology based, and very sleek, very efficient. A lot of AI, a lot of
Holograms?
yeah, a lot of holograms, things like that. So think
Mind operated?
yeah, think kind of like I guess like the Mass Effect games is pretty close.
And so your task was to gather technology and intel about the timeline.
Yeah, about what was happening in the future and what had happened in the intervening centuries. And for that was fairly simple. You could just go and you could just read up on it on the internet, you know.
What was their internet like?
It was way better than ours. It was just mind operated. You could just neural interface with your computer or glass pad and think, I want to research this and that, and it would all come up.
Did they still have English language? I mean, Japanese language?
No, they did not. They still had the names. They kept the traditional names, but they did not speak the Japanese language at all.
They had morphed it, or had they just switched to telepathy?
Most of the time it was telepathy. The language spoken was English, but of course it was changed a lot in the intervening centuries.
So they speak English in future Japan?
Well, it was off planet.
Oh, okay.
So it was a colony somewhere. Future Japan on Earth, I don't know, to be quite honest.
So you also were DNA modified because in the future they had means to detect you without these modifications.
Yes. I don't fully understand how that worked, but yes, you did have to have DNA modifications to blend in. Because I guess maybe we've evolved somewhat by then, and so it would be noticeable if they ran a DNA scan that you're not the same as everyone else.
And another operative was assigned to enter you into their mainframe as part of their society.
Yes. Another operative did do that. He got a job working for the company as an IT person, and so yeah, he would give me access to their computers through that.
And what did your job actually entail there?
I didn't really have a job. I was kind of a socialite who married the daughter of the guy who ran this company. So, yeah, that was what I did.
And you lived a really white collar, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it was a good life. I do have to admit it was a good life. And I was really quite upset when I had to leave it again.
And what were their means of travel?
Mostly portals. They had they looked kind of like phone booths, but they had portals in them, and you could step into them, dial in the coordinates, and then just walk through. And there were also vehicles. There were some vehicles, maglev-based cars and trains.
And I'm guessing none of today's architecture really mirrors theirs at that time.
Not really, no. Some of the really futuristic buildings, like the Shard building in London, places kind of like that. Those are kind of similar, but not really past that.
Right. And this company that you worked for, it's a cover job. You worked alongside this hacker, and tapped into their secret military contracts.
Yes. Even then, even in the future, there is still something like an ICC that is doing secret contracts with the military in space. So, yeah.
And the idea was to steal their blueprints and ideas, right?
Yes. And then
And
bring
did
it
you
back.
manage to do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And when you verified if the timeline changes happened, did you see anything that took you by surprise, or?
Not that I can recall specifically.
Okay. And were you told you need to change this now because it didn't quite take as we wanted, or what?
I think some people did get that assignment. I don't remember getting it myself, but I think some people did. Yeah.
And was this mission considered a success, or did it have to, be terminated?
It was considered a success.
I believe that you had to stage somewhat of an escape, though.
Yeah, I got caught. How exactly I got caught, we shall never know. But these agents showed up at this penthouse apartment that I lived in. I had to escape down the elevator shaft and walk through. This city had some, I guess, like tunnels connecting basements in buildings. I'm not sure what that was. It had some sort of a underground something, and I had to go through that and then hop onto a train, a maglev train, and go to another city. And there I had to hide under a bridge, and I used the computer to make contact with one of my other contacts there, and they got word back to Camp Hero to extract me.
I see. And this all involved probably quantum computers, because how else would you communicate, right?
I'm sure, yeah.
So there were also pleasant missions even in 2.0.
There were a number of times where you would be sent back in time to be part of high society, and that would entail living that lifestyle, and people would do a lot of things in order to get themselves on lists to be on those sorts of missions, so that they could do that and escape the trauma for a little bit.
But you also wrote that space travel like this was actually outsourced to a different branch of the Black Ops after a while, and they only focused on Earth.
Eventually, yes. For the most part, they did still occasionally have to go out into space because, I mean, there are times when things in space and history have affected us. So, but after a while, yeah, they stopped doing the space ops nearly so much. Yeah.
But did this Montauk project have more echoes, more reverberations in time because of the fact that it dealt with Earth, which also was the origin of all these thousands of breakaway planets? Was that the reason why it was so dangerous?
That's definitely part of it.
So you're not just playing with one planet, you're playing with thousands.
Yeah, you're playing with everything that is affected by what happens here. Yeah.
And if you, let's say, concentrated, or if you really did the inner work, do you reckon that you could actually write coherent stories about each of these life missions?
I'm doing that now. I am writing a book. It's from a different altar, but I am writing a book.
It's about an altar, but could you actually recall even the lifetimes that were nested inside this altar?
Yes, I can. I've reintegrated him, so I have his memories intact pretty much.
I believe that his name is Kyle, right? And he's still in the Project 3.0, Project Phoenix 3.0, which, no?
Not since late November when I reintegrated him. He was part of Project Phoenix 3.0 he was part of the latter part of 2.0 from 84 to 86, and then part of 3.0 from 86 up until last November.
I see. And just to set it up, he was a guard there.
I used to say that. I realized that's not quite the appropriate term. He was an armed escort. He would bodyguard people going out on missions.
He also looked like you, another clone.
No, he did not look like me. He looked. I mean, there is a resemblance in the shape of the face and things like that, but his hair was a different color, and his most striking feature, the thing that everyone kind of remembers about him, is that he had periwinkle blue eyes.
Mhm.
And my book is, that's actually the title of my book, is The Man with the Periwinkle Eyes, because
Well,
that's his most striking feature.
yeah, that should be fun. Were you also going to maybe ground this whole, outrageous disclosure, maybe with some details regarding what's left of the Montauk Project infrastructure?
Okay, I'll
So,
pull the pictures up, I'll go through them, and then I'll send them to you in the order that I discussed them in.
sounds good.
Okay, let me go pull those up. This first image is of the infamous Montauk Manor. It's still there. It is now a hotel. It's a tremendous
Wait,
mansion.
I lost your video.
Well, I
Just,
can't.
I see. No problem. No problem.
Okay. I remember there would be parties there, massive, extravagant parties. I believe Preston actually lived in this manor when he became the project head, and there were some eyes wide shut parties that happened there and things like that. And there were also some pleasant things that happened there that are very personal, so I won't go into detail.
Fair enough. And that's also on Long Island then.
Yes, this is all around Montauk Point in New York, on Long Island. Okay. The second picture is what appears to be, I'm not sure what the original purposes of these buildings were. However, one of them was converted into apartments for dignitaries, visiting dignitaries, particularly non-humans. It's two buildings side by side, and the building on the right was originally used by us as a concert hall. It later became a shop for where you could go and buy certain foodstuffs after eventually it was converted into that.
So
This
if you
building,
were to visit them right now, you would get probably a flood of memories and
absolutely,
feelings.
yeah, absolutely, yes. This photograph, I believe, is it's the back side of the building that housed assets sent in from the Marine Corps specifically. I can remember when I was a child hiding there. There were a couple of Marines who were good to us who would let us hide there in a crawl space underneath the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also kind of the epicenter of the black market. I'll talk about the black market in a minute, actually, when I'm done with these pictures. This building here, it was an armory. However, I want to draw attention to where the picture is being taken from. It's being taken from a mostly grassed over foundation. The foundation was a building that was referred to as the Situation Room, which is where briefings occurred, and is where the actress Judy Garland worked, or a clone of the actress Judy Garland. And she was a kind of psychic court reporter. That was what we called her. She would record all of this stuff by sitting in on the briefings and then psychically upload it into the computers.
Wow.
All the intel, yeah. This building here is a house. It was lived in by a certain paperclip Nazi by the name of Helmut Monowitz, and he was a key figure. He was the paperclip Nazi I mentioned earlier who took power in a silent coup for several years. This building was the what would you call it? The concert hall. What became the second concert hall. It stayed that right up until Camp Hero ceased being used in 2014. A great many of the popular songs of today and of history were played for the first time in this building.
Oh, really? You know what's left of it?
Yes, I'm looking at a picture of it. It's just an empty building now, just
Hmm.
derelict, and condemned, I think. Oh, I should mention right behind it there was a chimney that appeared to be on attached to it, but it actually wasn't because there is no fireplace in the building. It was the chimney coming up out of the crematoria. This
I see.
photograph is of what is now a parking lot on the bluffs, uh, not far from the lighthouse. In my day, it was a landing pad for ships, for small craft.
Cool.
This is that from another angle where you can see the walkway up to the lighthouse. Up by the lighthouse on the grass there is where Kyle first saw the fallout of the junior incident, where he saw kids up there playing and dancing around, celebrating, was right up there by on that grass.
And the
This
lighthouse,
is
right?
yes. There's the lighthouse. Oh, I should make a note about the room at the top of the lighthouse. That was where myself and my trauma twin would retreat to get away from it all.
Hmm.
And there were a couple of songs played up there. Okay. This is further along the bluffs. This is just pretty much wilderness now. Up here, this was actually, back in my day, this was a training ground. They would just train kids in various things up above ground right here. I can remember distinctly kids who had the ability to levitate would run off the edge of the bluffs and fly and do a loop-de-loop back onto the bluffs.
Yeah. And much of this was confirmed by fellow
Yes,
abductees. Yeah.
yes. Oh God. Okay, this picture. This is the road leading up towards the radar tower. This road is. It was referred to as the highway to hell.
Mm.
Obvious reasons. And you must envision it as it was back then. There would be black vans or sometimes school buses, sometimes white vans, and sometimes even just military vehicles going all up and down it, unloading it. Um, Kids screaming and crying, terrified. Some of them, I believe, were probably already dead when they had arrived. Some of them had to be carried because they had no strength because they had been driving for days with no food or water. Um, and sometimes when they opened up these cars or vans, the stench would permeate the entirety of the compound. And this road would have been lined up and down the sides with men and women in Air Force uniforms who, some of them had cattle prods and some of them had very, very ferocious Doberman. And sometimes, just for the hell of it, one of them would unleash one of these Doberman into the crowd of kids.
Hmm. It sounds like the darkest, the most unsightly, the most gruesome of the programs, right? It's pretty much the worst of, you could say.
I definitely agree with that, yes.
Hmm. And that's why probably it took you the longest to speak out on it and also to remember them because you kept them locked away for a while, right?
Yes.
I seem to recall asking you in 2021 whether you were part of Montauk and you hadn't even come to that realization yet.
No, I had not. I had
Hmm.
not. This here is an entrance to one of the barracks to Battery 216. This will be a lot more prominent in Kyle's testimony video, but this was the German single men's barracks.
Hmm.
This is behind the radar tower. This is a building that was known as the White House or Waisenhause. Um, it was where certain communications equipment was kept.
Interesting.
This is what is now known as the Montauk Community Church. It has no steeple now, which is interesting. But under the program or within the time bubble, it was the home of the Historische Abteilung, or Historicity Department in English. The man Helmut Monowitz was the head of it, and so he insisted on calling it by its German name. And
Right.
this was where the scrolls and the books were poured over, and where also it was the department in charge of finding any and all unintended changes to the timeline. This is a roundabout on a road in the center of the compound. On the left, you can see the concert hall building. On the right, you can see a building that was, it was actually Ezekiel's house, a small white one-story building. It wasn't built to be a house, but that was where he lived.
So he wasn't the giant?
No, he wasn't. He was maybe 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
This is another view of the armory. I believe you can see the door. Yeah, you can. You can see the door to it. And it actually had rose bushes out around it. They had a very, on the surface levels, they kept up appearances quite well. There were ornamental bushes and little community gardens and things like that. I guess for people who might be visiting, to give them a good impression.
Right.
This is a very old photograph. This building is no longer there, but it was housing for some of the privileged officers, particularly the Air Force men and women,
Mm-hmm.
and for small families. There were some small families there, and the children in those families were not subject to the trauma that the kids who had been trafficked there were.
I see.
This is a building also no longer there next to the radar tower. It was home to a repair shop of sorts for advanced technologies, and the staff were mostly ETs. This is the gate right before the radar tower, the Gates of Hell, as it was called.
So a lot of today's buildings are actually inhabited by ETs, unbeknownst to us.
I'm sure. These are old pictures from when these buildings were still standing. A lot of them, if you go to Camp Hero today, they're not there anymore. But these are old photographs.
Mm-hmm.
This is another door into what I believe was a small hangar bay for very small vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
hover bikes and things like that. This is the main entrance to the underground portion. This was
Is it the shaft?
No, this is a building. It has a big half moon shaped
Mm-hmm.
overhang over the door, and it's closed off now. But you would go in there, and there was a huge elevator that went down to the underground, the deeper underground portions, including to the maglev station, because Montauk, of course, was connected to the maglev network that goes around the planet.
Yep.
This is a house. It was quite personal to me. There was one officer there. I will not name him, but he was decent to me and a small group of other kids, including a certain lost boy by the name of Stan Mulgrave, who died during the Trojan War. This
Mm-hmm.
house, we would go there for barbecues, actually. Stan would do the barbecuing. It's kind of funny to remember. And they had a weeping willow in the back, and I remember my trauma twin would lay back on the grass under that weeping willow and would write poetry.
Cool.
This is another view of the Waisenhauser, or the White House, and the radar tower, and a clearer, more up close view.
Mm-hmm.
And no, this is not the Waisenhauser. This is the house that Albelik lived in. I never got to go in, of course, but I knew that he lived there.
Mm-hmm.
This is the door into the Naval Intelligence Barracks, where Naval Intelligence assets lived. And they were the cruelest. Well, no, the Air Force people were the cruelest, but the Naval Intelligence people were also quite awful to us. They would see the kids walking in groups along the pathways past these barracks, and they would come in and come out and grab a couple sometimes and things like that. So you would try to avoid walking past here whenever you could.
That's rough.
Yeah. This is the building that it was makeshift offices of sorts. Ezekiel's office was in this building. There's a tree visible here in the foreground. right in front of one of the windows. I actually planted that tree. I remember doing that. Ezekiel, that was one of the good things he did. He gave me the seeds for it, and he told me to do that and to attend to it. I guess trying to give me a tiny bit of something to live for, to watch that tree grow.
Pretty cool.
This is a shaft. You can see down. You can very clearly see that there are still some visible entrances to tunnels underneath the main compound in this image.
And that's just the stuff you found online. There must be countless other landmarks that you would recall if you actually went there.
Yes. This is the pathway up to the lighthouse. This is how Kyle got to work every day, was walking along this path. He used an entrance that was near the lighthouse in what looked on the surface like a shed. I couldn't find a picture of it, but this is the path to it that he took every day. And it was a very long path, and to this day he will bitch and moan about having to walk like a mile to work every day. This is an aerial view of that roundabout that I showed earlier. You can see the radar tower, and you can see the path going out from it into the more of the proper compound. And there's also a bit of green there visible in the upper part of the picture, grass, and I think those are picnic tables there now. Kids would sneak out there and they would play kickball there at night.
I see.
This is a view of, you can see quite a large foundation. I can't remember exactly what was in the building where the foundation is, but you can also see on the left side the Marine Corps barracks, and on the right side another set of barracks where certain children lived who were too psychic to be able to mix with the rest of the population. They were kept there basically in quarantine.
So they were the danger to others?
Yes. And they could have also assisted in fighting back. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember exactly what these two buildings are on either side of the house in this image. However, this house is where Dr. Maria lived. And I might add, she was there as an agent of this Orion Syndicate group.
Wow.
And so she had two Draco, quote unquote, guards outside her house. They were, I believe, they were cyborgs, however. They had been found dead, resurrected through cybernetics, and then had human soul fragments inserted into them. So they were Draco in genetics only, basically. And they guarded her house.
Do you wish to go there at any point to see and verify for yourself?
I go back and forth on that, honestly. Do I really want to put myself through that again? But on the other hand, I need to, probably for my own mental health. And this building here, on the right, there are two buildings here. The one on the right it had a tunnel that led to an adjoining facility on Plum Island, which is where the girls were processed for a time. Eventually, they stopped doing that, and they started doing co-ed processing, and the Plum Island facility became an enormous genetics research facility. The building on the left was where some punishments were carried out on the children, including the floggings. They would flog you with this this leather horsewhip that had metal rivets attached to it at odd intervals, and I know to this day Alex has some scars on his back where his flesh just opened up like a Ziploc bag being hit with that thing.
Damn.
Yeah. I think that's all the pictures.
Yeah, I just wish I could have done justice to your Montauk experiences because it's so extensive and deserves its whole series.
I do want to say a word on the black market at Camp
Okay.
Hero. You could not survive on the things you were given. You were given a ration of dog food, and there might well be, when it was in the chicken wire enclosure, there might well be 100 or more kids in there, and they would throw in one bowl of dog food. You could not survive on that. So there had to be a black market, and some of the better, less evil officers and some of the ETs who were there provided that, and also some of these kids who were not subjected to these tortures, the children of officers. They would be, what was king was high-calorie, non-perishable foods. Condensed milk, graham crackers, candies, beef jerky. And I had
peanut butter.
Yeah, peanut butter, jams, canned fruits and vegetables, all that sort of thing. Like I said, high calorie, high sugar, non-perishable. And those would be passed around in secret. Maybe as you were walking past someone on a pathway, you would accidentally bump into them. Or maybe someone would leave it in a hiding place and you would grab it and then hide it in your clothes when no one was looking, and things like that.
So you were all basically prisoners of war in terms of physique. You were that starved.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. Sometimes they would fatten you up so you could blend in when you went on a mission, but for the most part, yeah, you were pretty well starved while you were on base. And you got a hold of these things where you could, and this is part of what I consider the worst crime that they committed, was the dehumanization. The killing, horrendous, obviously, but everyone dies eventually, right? They made you also so you were so selfish that you would do anything for a bite of food and a place to sleep and a toilet. And they dehumanized you to less than an animal level, because animals sacrifice for their herds and we did not. So, in my book, that's the worst thing they did.
Do you consider that from a bird's eye point of view, that maybe taking you all the way to the edge of your sense of self-worth is
you lost your dignity and your identity as a human being?
Yeah, but also you could, let's say, withstand those things, whereas other kids went catatonic. So maybe you should look at it that you were somehow meant to live through that, and to be able to strengthen in the long run all those things that they deprive you of.
Yeah, I guess so. There was, I guess, that fringe benefit, and was a strong enough personality that I'm able to talk about it now. But
yeah. And in the long run, what would you like to see in terms of recompense or repair for damages that were inflicted?
I would like to see therapy given out for free. And I would like to get our back pay, because they owe us probably millions of dollars apiece. And I want the public to know about this, and there are plenty of these kids who died and were never seen again, who simply vanished from the face of the earth, and their families never knew what had happened to them. And they deserve to be given that information and the means to grieve and all of that. So I want to see memorials built for this. I've had what I think might be memories from a future timeline, or it might just be my wishful thinking. I really don't know, but it's where Camp Hero is bulldozed and they plant a massive rose garden where they plant a rose bush, one rose bush per child who died. And in this vision or memory or whatever it is, the disturbing thing is, when you're standing in it, you can't even see the end of how many rose bushes there are, because so many died. But so I'd like to see all that done, and I would like to see, I would like legal action to be taken, because plenty of the perpetrators are still alive, and they should be punished.
Well said. So in this timeline, there was justice enacted for all the wrongs?
Yes. It was.
And it was officially recognized, and
yes, it was tribunal at The Hague. for crimes against humanity. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you haven't jinxed it with this video.
I don't think so. I think that part of it was me talking about it so that people know that that can happen. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, well, I think you did an excellent job yet again. And we're really looking forward to the sequel, which will involve picking up from where we left off with
Yeah.
Project Phoenix 3.0, and maybe give a sort of summary of your upcoming book.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Okay, take care.